For decades, Japan avoided saying the unthinkable, that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would force a Japanese military response. But in November 2025, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi shattered that silence, triggering Beijing's fury and the worst crisis since World War II. What pushed Japan to abandon 80 years of restraint, and what does it really take, legally and militarily, to turn words into war? The answer begins with a clause written in 1947. Japan's post-war path was set in 1947 when its new constitution introduced Article 9. The clause renounced war as a sovereign right and banned the use of force to settle international disputes. For decades, this single article defined the limits of Japan's self-defense forces and shaped every foreign policy decision. In 1972, as Tokyo normalized relations with Beijing, Japanese leaders reaffirmed their commitment to peaceful means, avoiding any hint of military involvement in the Taiwan Strait. Official statements focused on stability and dialogue, never on intervention. That restraint began to shift in the early 21st century. Regional tensions grew and calls for a stronger defense policy gained ground. In 2014, the Abe cabinet reinterpreted Article 9, allowing Japan, for the first time, to exercise collective self-defense in limited cases if an ally under attack threatened Japan's own survival. The following year, new security legislation was passed, codifying this reinterpretation into law. The 2015 statute set out that Japan could respond with force if a survival-threatening situation was declared. These changes did not erase the legacy of pacifism, but they opened the door to a new era, one where Japan's military could act beyond its borders under specific legal conditions. The 2015 security legislation introduced a precise legal threshold. Japan may use force only if a survival-threatening situation is declared. That phrase, written into law, means that Japan's existence must be at risk, or the rights of its people fundamentally endangered, before the government can authorize collective self-defense. The Cabinet Legislation Bureau, acting as the constitutional gatekeeper, holds the authority to interpret whether unfolding events meet this test. In practice, the process is anything but automatic. The Prime Minister and Cabinet must first gather intelligence, debate the facts, and reach consensus. Only then does the Cabinet issue a formal declaration, opening the door for military action. On November 25, 2025, the government clarified Takaichi's remarks, stating that any decision would depend on all available information based on the specific situation. The cabinet emphasized that Japan's position remained unchanged and that no policy review was underway. That statement underlined the complexity of moving from a legal trigger to an operational response. In recent simulation exercises, experts found that it took months for officials to agree on whether a crisis met the survival-threatening threshold. While the law provides a path to action, the machinery behind it moves slow, weighed down by legal review and bureaucratic caution. For Japan, the gap between doctrine and real-time decision-making remains a critical challenge. Japan's self-defense forces today field some of the most advanced hardware in East Asia. The Maritime Self-Defense Force operates 8 Aegis-equipped destroyers, capable of tracking and intercepting ballistic missiles. Its submarine fleet, often praised for stealth and endurance, numbers more than 20 boats. In the air, Japan deploys more than 300 modern fighter jets, including F-35 fighters and upgraded F-15 fighters, supported by early warning aircraft and aerial refueling tankers. On paper, these assets offer a formidable shield around the home islands and the vital sea lanes stretching towards Taiwan. Yet, for all its strengths, gaps remain. Japan's airlift and sealift capacity lags far behind what a cross-strait contingency would demand. The ability to sustain operations beyond the first few days, to move troops, supplies, and heavy equipment, faces hard limits. Meanwhile, China's People's Liberation Army Navy has surpassed Japan in both ship numbers and total tonnage, expanding amphibious and missile capabilities every year. For Japan's self-defense forces commanders, the balance is clear. Japan can mount a powerful defense close to home, but projecting sustained force into a Taiwan crisis would stretch its resources to the edge. The security treaty between the United States and Japan, signed in 1960, forms the backbone of Japan's external defense. Article 5 states that an armed attack against either country in Japanese territory would prompt both to act to meet the common danger. Yet the treaty does not automatically guarantee United States intervention in every scenario. Instead, it requires a joint decision. Tokyo and Washington must agree that a crisis meets the threshold for alliance action. In practice, this means high-level consultations between the Japanese cabinet and United States military command, often involving rapid intelligence sharing and diplomatic readouts. The 2015 guidelines for United States and Japan defense cooperation updated these procedures, clarifying that United States forces stationed in Japan could be mobilized to support Japanese operations if a survival-threatening situation is declared. Forward deployed American assets, including 7th Fleet warships and Air Force squadrons at bases like Yokota and Kadena, provide the muscle behind deterrence. For China, this alliance mechanism signals that a Taiwan conflict could draw in both militaries, transforming a regional crisis into a test of unified resolve. China's response arrived with the force of official condemnation and public warning. On November 10, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning denounced Takaichi's remarks as a violation of the 4 foundational documents that define China-Japan relations. She said that the Japanese side had seriously damaged the political foundation of China-Japan relations and grossly interfered in China's internal affairs. The ministry demanded an immediate retraction, warning that any attempt at armed intervention would be treated as an act of aggression. Within hours, Beijing's United Nations ambassador delivered a formal letter to United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, calling Takaichi's comments a grave breach of international law and urging the international community to uphold the One China principle. Chinese state media echoed the official line, but sharpened it for a domestic audience. Commentators accused Japan of abandoning post-war restraint and warned that any military move would be met with a crushing defeat. The People's Daily ran headlines warning of severe consequences for what it called reckless provocation. On social media, the Chinese consul general in Osaka posted that Japan's leaders were playing with fire and risked dragging their country into disaster. Military signals followed rhetoric. The People's Liberation Army announced plans for live-fire naval exercises in the East China Sea, citing the need to safeguard national sovereignty. Notices went out to civilian shipping to avoid designated zones near the median line. Analysts in Beijing and Tokyo began to track these maneuvers as potential rehearsal for a blockade. The military posture and the rhetoric together sent a clear signal. The message from Beijing was clear: any shift in Japan's policy would not go unchallenged, and the risk of escalation now loomed over the entire region. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi stood firm in the days after her statement, refusing to retract her remarks even as pressure mounted from both inside and outside government. Her response drew sharp lines across Japanese society. On November 29th, thousands filled the streets of Tokyo, carrying signs demanding de-escalation and warning against the risk of war. Protest organizers cited fears that Japan could be drawn into a conflict far from its shores, with banners reading "No More War" and "Protect Article 9." Yet opinion polls revealed a divided public. Some citizens voiced support for Takaichi's resolve, arguing that Japan could not ignore threats to its vital sea lanes and energy supplies. Others, including business leaders, warned that any confrontation would threaten Japan's economic lifelines. Nearly 90% of imported oil passes through waters near Taiwan. The stakes extend beyond the abstract. In Okinawa, families live within range of Chinese missiles, and local officials quietly update evacuation plans. Supermarket owners in Sapporo worry about seafood bans after China halted imports of Japanese fish, a move that sent prices tumbling and left fishing communities anxious about their future. Meanwhile, defense analysts warned that any escalation could force Japan to consider the unthinkable, raising its nuclear threshold for deterrence. For many, the debate is no longer just about doctrine or diplomacy. It is about the risks that ripple through daily life, the possibility that decisions made in Tokyo could reshape the fate of millions. As the government weighs next steps, the country stands at a crossroads, with each path carrying consequences for its people, economy, and security. Asia's security balance now hangs on a single declaration, one that redraws red lines for both Tokyo and Beijing. As leaders trade warnings, escalation remains one decision away. In this new era of clarity, the question isn't if tensions will rise, but how the world will respond. Share your thoughts below.